on executive performance, but from a slightly different angle. In the last video, yesterday, I talked about how to evaluate executive performance in a way that actually drives growth. That conversation was about the review process itself, how to move beyond a traditional annual review, how to make the conversation developmental, and how to turn feedback into real leadership growth agenda. Today, I want to go one level deeper into what the best firms actually measure. Because once you accept that executive performance reviews should be more than a rating or a compensation conversation, the next question becomes, what should we actually be looking at? And that is where many organizations still fall short. They measure revenue, results, growth, execution, client retention, strategic milestones, and those things matter. They absolutely matter, but they do not tell the whole story. An executive can look successful on paper while creating confusion, dependency, politics, misalignment underneath the surface. So today, we're looking at the deeper indicators of executive performance: trust, decision quality, communication clarity, strategic alignment, team health, retention, peer effectiveness, emotional intelligence, and cultural impact. Why me? I'm a psychotherapist and an executive performance coach, founder of EPC Leadership, Executive Performance Coaching. I work with CEOs, senior leaders, and executive teams in high-pressure environments where performance is not just measured by outcomes, but by the leader's inner architecture, strategic alignment, and adaptive leadership impact on the system around them. So if the last conversation was about how to structure the review, this one is about what should actually be on the scorecard. Because what looks like performance on paper does not always reveal what is happening beneath the surface. So the first measurement is still business performance. So let's start with the obvious. Business performance does matter. Any serious executive evaluation has to look at whether the leader delivered on the role, whether they hit the financial targets, they grow the business, they retain key clients, they have an executive strategy and they're able to execute well, they improve operational performance, they were capable at managing risk, and they delivered on the commitments attached to the role. Those metrics are necessary, but they are not sufficient. The problem is that many organizations stop there. They evaluate the executive almost entirely by outcomes and assume that if the number looks good, the leadership must be good. That is a dangerous assumption because results can hide damage. A leader can hit the numbers and burn out the team at the same time. They can grow revenue, but they can also damage trust. They can retain clients, but lose internal credibility. And of course, they can drive execution, but they might create fear while doing so. And they can appear externally impressive, but internally costly. So the first question is not only, did this leader deliver? The better question is, what did this leader have to create, strengthen, weaken, or distort in order to deliver? That is where the evaluation becomes more mature, because business outcomes are the scoreboard, but they are not the whole game. We want to measure strategic alignment, as mentioned. One of the most important indicators of executive performance is strategic alignment. The best firms will measure whether executives can translate their strategy into operating behavior, because a leader can understand the strategy and still fail to operationalize it. They can repeat the priorities in the meeting, They can support the vision publicly, and they can sound aligned in front of any CEO or the board. But then nothing changes underneath of them. The old meetings continue, the same incentives, old conflicts continue to go unnamed, old priorities keep competing, and old behaviors are staying protected. That is not real alignment. Real alignment means the strategy shows up in decisions, in calendars, and metrics. We're seeing trade-offs, we're seeing rhythm, there's resource allocation, and there's true coaching conversations taking place. That is what I often call the Tuesday test. If the strategy is real, it has to show up on Tuesday. It has to show up in what the leader says. It has to show up in what the leader says no to. It has to show up in what gets measured and what gets discussed repeatedly. It has to show up in how people spend their time. Sorry about that. So one of the best performance indicators is, did this executive make the strategy operationally real? Not just understandable, but real. Did their team know what mattered the most? Were they able to reduce competing priorities? Were they able to be clear in the trade-offs? Did they connect the enterprise priorities to functional execution? And did they help people understand what needed to change behaviorally, not just in language? So the best firms are measuring this because they know strategy does not fail only because the idea was wrong. It fails because the leaders never translate it into the system. We also want to measure decision quality. So another indicator here, decision quality, meaning executives are not just paid to work hard, they're paid to make good decisions under pressure. And at that executive level, decision-making is rarely clean. There's incomplete information, competing priorities, there's pressure, emotional pressure, board pressure, political dynamics. The trade-offs cannot be avoided. So the question becomes, how did this leader make decisions when the conditions are imperfect? The best firms do not evaluate only whether the outcome of the decision was good. They evaluate the quality of the decision process. Did the executive define the problem? Were they able to gather the right input, separate signal from noise, name the trade-offs, figure out the right speed, avoid unnecessary delays, communicate clearly, and own any implications? This matters because poor decision quality spreads through the organization. If the executive is unclear, the team becomes unclear. And if the executive is avoiding things like trade-offs, everyone else is going to inherit the confusion. And if the executive overreacts, the system's going to become reactive as well. Delays, same thing. People wait. And if we constantly change direction, people are going to stop trusting the strategy. So decision quality is not just an individual capacity, it's a system-level performance metric. So the best firms are measuring whether a leader improved the quality of judgment around them, or whether they continue to distort it. So, did their decision-making create clarity, speed, and accountability, or confusion, more churn, more rework? We also want to measure trust. So trust is one of the most important executive performance indicators, but it is also one of the most misunderstood. Trust does not mean everyone likes this person. Trust does not mean that this leader avoids hard conversations. And trust does not mean people are always comfortable. Trust means people believe the leader is coherent, honest, steady, and aligned between words and their behaviors. At the executive level, trust is performance infrastructure. When trust is high, the information moves faster. People raise issues earlier. Teams are going to collaborate more directly and efficiently. Bad news will travel upward, and decisions are accepted more quickly. And conflicts are actually viewed as productivity. So when trust is low, everything's going to slow down. People will edit the truth, they will manage the optics, and they will protect themselves. Side conversations will happen. Compliance in the meeting rooms will happen, and resistance outside will. And they'll stop bringing the leader what the leader most needs to know. So the best firms are and will measure trust, not as a nice culture concept, but as an operating condition. They're going to ask questions like, do people trust this person's judgment? Do they trust how they follow through? Do they trust this person to tell the truth? And do they trust this leader under pressure? Do they believe the words and actions match? And can they bring difficult conversations without fear of punishment or dismissal? And that last one is especially important because if people cannot bring bad news to an executive, the executive is operating with distorted information. And distorted information leads to distorted decisions and is costly. So trust is not soft. Trust is part of the decision quality, part of the execution speed, and overall organizational intelligence. We also want to measure communication clarity. The best firms are measuring communication clarity, not whether the executive is charismatic or whether they're polished, not whether they sound impressive. It's does the leader's communication improve execution? Some executives are very articulate and still very unclear. They speak in concepts, but people need implications. They speak about strategy, but people need priorities. They talk about collaboration, but people need to know decision rights. Urgency, people need to know the sequence. And they always talk about accountability, but people need to know what are the standards. So the best firms are measuring whether the leader's communication creates operational clarity. Do people leave meetings knowing what's been decided? Who owns what matters most, what do they have to change, what do they have to stop doing, and how are we measuring success? This is especially important during change. During change, people do not only listen to what leaders say, they listen for what the leader means. They're looking for consistency, they're looking for contradiction, they're looking for what's being avoided. They look for whether that leader is going to be calm or vague or defensive or grounded. So communication clarity is not just message delivery, it's actually sense making. The executive's job is to help people understand reality, direction, trade-offs, next steps. A strong performance review is going to ask, did this leader reduce ambiguity? Did they make people have a sense of complexity? Did they close loops? Did they communicate decisions clearly? Did their communication create movement? That is what a strong firm will do. Measure team health and retention. So important. Major performance indicator in team health. It's not in a vague cultural survey kind of way, which is often given. The question is the team stronger because of this executive's leadership? The best firms are looking at retention, morale, engagement. They're looking at succession strength, internal mobility, and the quality of the leadership bench. They're going to ask, are strong people staying or are they leaving? Are high potential leaders developing? Are the direct reports becoming more capable? And is the team collaborating better over time? And are people willing to take ownership? Is there unnecessary turnover? Are people leaving because of the work or because of the leadership environment? Retention matters, but it also needs interpretation. Sometimes turnover is necessary. A strong executive may raise standards and some people may opt out. So the question is not simply, did anyone leave? The question is, who left? Why did they leave? And what pattern does it reveal? If low performers leave because the standard became clearer, that may be healthy. If strong performers leave because they feel blocked, dismissed, overmanaged, and exhausted, that is a leadership signal. The best firms pay attention to that because they know that talent does not only leave companies, talent often leaves leadership environments. So the team health is not separate from executive performance. It's one of the clearest indicators of executive performance because senior leaders don't not just manage work, they create the conditions in which people either grow, contribute, and or stay, or protect themselves, and whether they leave. We also want to measure capacity building. So the best firms also measure whether the executive builds capacity beneath them. This is a major distinction. Some leaders are personally productive, but systematically limiting. They're solving everything, they're rescuing too quickly, they become the answer center, essentially bottlenecking. They're holding too much information, or they stay involved in too many decisions too long. And they also create dependency and then become frustrated that nobody steps up. So that's the kind of leader that can look extremely valuable because everything runs through them, but that's not always an executive strength. Because sometimes it is the bottleneck disguised as commitment. And at the executive level, the job is not just to demonstrate capacity, the job is to build capacity. So performance reviews should be looking at, did this leader develop other leaders? Are they clarifying the decision rights? Are they delegating ownership? Are they coaching instead of rescuing? And are they creating successors? Are they building these repeatable systems instead of relying on these heroic efforts? And can the team function when the executive is not in the room? And that's really important, that last piece. Because if the team falls apart every time the executive steps away, that leader may be effective personally, but they are not scaling leadership. And the best firms are going to measure whether the leader is creating independence, judgment, ownership, and the bench strength. Because executive performance is not just about how much the leader can carry, it's about how much stronger the organization becomes because of their leadership. We also want to measure emotional intelligence under pressure. That's another critical metric, but again, misunderstood. This is not about being nice or endlessly patient or avoiding conflict or making everybody feel good. At the executive level, emotional intelligence is the ability to stay regulated enough to lead clearly under pressure, and is the ability to notice your own internal reaction without being ruled by it. It's the ability to hear feedback without becoming defensive. It's the ability to engage conflict without becoming punitive or reactive, and the ability to read the room without becoming captive to it. That matters because the executive's inner world does not stay private. A leader's anxiety can become urgency, and defensiveness becomes silence, and avoidance can become drift, and a leader's need for approval becomes unclear accountability, and a leader's field can become overmanagement. So these firms are measuring how a leader behaves under pressure. They're asking questions and reviewing questions such as, can this leader receive bad news? Are they staying clear in conflict? And can they regulate before they influence? Are they able to repair when they create an impact? And can they hold standards without creating fear? And this is where the inner architecture becomes a performance issue, because a leader's operating system shapes how they perceive threat, meaning making, or respond to challenges, or even relating to other people. And if that inner architecture is unexamined, it will show up in the system. It's not a therapy issue, it is a leadership issue. Because when an executive is emotionally reactive, the organization gets less honest. They become less adaptive and ultimately less intelligent. That is why emotional intelligence belongs in an executive evaluation, not as a personality category, as a leadership performance category. We also want to measure cultural impact. So another thing the best firms are measuring is cultural impact. And again, I don't mean culture in the abstract. I mean, what behaviors become normal because this executive is in the system. Every executive teaches the organization what is acceptable. They teach it by what they reward, what they tolerate, what they ignore, how they respond under pressure, by who gets promoted. They teach it by what happens after a hard conversation. So a review would ask, what culture does this leader create around them? Are they creating clarity, candor or fear, ownership, dependency, collaboration, discipline, learning, trust, or performance theater? And this matters because culture is not mainly what the organization says it values. Culture is what people learn inside safe, rewarding, punished, or ignored environments. And a leader may talk about collaboration, but reward individual heroics. Talk about innovation, but punish mistakes. They're going to talk about accountability, but avoid these difficult conversations. And they may talk about transparency but withhold some context. And they talk about trust, but behave unpredictably under stress. And that's cultural impact. And the best firms are going to measure it because they know executives don't just lead teams. They shape the behavioral norms of the organization. We also want to take a look at measuring peer effectiveness. So one overlooked performance indication is peer effectiveness. Executives are often evaluated vertically. So how does the CEO see them, or how does the board see them, or how do their direct reports see them? Those perspectives matter, but the executive level peer effectiveness is critical because enterprise performance depends on whether senior leaders can collaborate across functions. So a brilliant CFO who cannot partner with the COO is going to create drag. A strong revenue leader who cannot align with the product creates friction. And a talented general counsel who only says no without helping leaders find a path forward is going to create avoidance. A high-performing business unit leader who protects their own territory at the expense of enterprise priorities becomes a systems problem. So the best firms are measuring whether an executive is strong across the table, not just down the org chart. They ask, does the leader collaborate well with peers? Are they thinking enterprise first or function first? Are they sharing information appropriately and making trade-offs visible? And do they build trust with other senior leaders? Can they help the executive team become more coherent? This is essential because many executives' failures are not failures of individual competence. They are failures of cross-functional leadership. They can be excellent inside their domain, but really costly across the enterprise level. And that is exactly what a strong review system has to catch. We're also measuring accountability. So the best firms are going to measure this, not just whether the executive holds people accountable, because that phrase gets used too loosely. Healthy accountability is also not aggression, by the way. It's not blame or public embarrassment. It's not emotional intensity. It's not avoidance dressed up as empathy. It's healthy accountability defined by clear, timely, direct, and connected to standards. They're saying things like, here's what we agreed to, here is where we're off, here's where the impact is, this is what needs to change, here's the available support, and this is what happens if it does not change. That's clean accountability. So we're measuring this by asking certain questions like, does this executive set clear expectations? Are they addressing issues early enough? And are they following through? Are they giving direct feedback? Or are they avoiding by rescuing people from unclear ownership? And are they holding standards without creating fear? And do they preserve dignity while maintaining these performance expectations? And so that balance matters. Accountability without dignity creates fear, and dignity without accountability is going to create drift. So the best executives can hold both, and the best firms measure whether they do. And so we also want to measure a growth edge, right? So finally, the best firms measure growth edge. This is different from weakness. A weakness sounds static. A growth edge is developmental. So it's going to ask things like, what is the next level of leadership this person needs to grow in? For one executive, the growth edge might be delegation. For another, it's conflict capacity. For others, it's emotional regulation or strategic translation or enterprise thinking. It may be moving from founder contribution to governance. And so the best firms are asking, or do not just ask, is this executive good or bad? What they're truly asking is, what does the business need from this leader now? And what part of their leadership has to evolve to meet that demand? So that question is much more useful because leadership performance is contextual. A leader can be very effective in one season and underdeveloped for the next. A leader who is excellent in crisis may struggle in stabilization. And a leader who built the company may struggle to lead others in how they lead it. So growth edge should be measured because it connects evaluation to development. It prevents the review from becoming only judgment, and it turns the review into a leadership map. So if we put this together, a stronger executive performance scorecard would measure several things. Business outcome, did the leader deliver measurable results? Strategic alignment, did the leader translate strategy into an operating behavior? Decision quality, did the leader make timely, clear, informed decisions? Trust and communication, are they creating clarity, credibility, and honesty? Team health and retention, did the leader create an environment where the strong people grow and contribute and stay? Capacity building. Are they developing other leaders and reducing dependency on themselves? Emotional intelligence. Did the leader stay regulated, clear, and adaptive in difficult times? Cultural impact. What behaviors became more normal because of this leader? Peer effectiveness. Did the leader strengthen cross-functional alignment and executive team coherence? Growth edge. Number 10, what are the 2 or 3 leadership patterns that need to evolve next? That kind of scorecard gives you much more complete picture of the executive performance. It keeps business outcomes at the center, but it does not pretend outcomes happen in isolation. It measures the leader's effect on the system. And at the executive level, that is what performance really is. So when we ask, what do the best firms actually measure when evaluating executive performance? The answer is they measure the full leadership impact. They're not just measuring revenue, results, activity, or charisma, or just whether the leader looks successful. They're measuring the conditions the leader creates: trust, alignment, decisions, team health, communication, retention, conflict, looking at whether the organization became stronger or weaker under that leader. Because what looks like performance on paper does not actually reveal what is happening beneath the surface. Because a leader may develop results while quietly weakening the system. And again, a leader may be building that kind of trust or clarity or capacity that creates sustainable performance over time. That's what we want. So the best firms know the difference. They understand that executive performance is not only what gets produced, it's what gets produced, how it gets produced, and what happens in the organizational process. That is the kind of evaluation that drives real growth. That's the kind of evaluation that I help organizations set up successfully. I'm Paul Sheesley, founder of EPC Leadership. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.